Hi everyone. Today I'm going to show you how to perform ABO grouping. We're going to be doing the forward type using patient red blood cells. The reverse group will be done with patient plasma. D-typing will be done with patient red blood cells. And weak D will be performed if necessary. Before we can begin testing, we must ensure that our tubes and our worksheets are properly labeled with 2 patient identifiers. So, let's look at our first sample from Adelphi, fill, ID number 19076. If you look at my worksheet, here in the patient section, you will see Adelphi, fill, ID number 19076. Good. Now for the next patient. Angelfish, Alissa, ID number 10122. Let's look at the sheets. In the next patient section, we have Angelfish, Alissa, 10122. Good. Now, let's check our tubes. We have 19076A. That's because this is the patient identifier and this is the reagent that will be going in the tube. Now, our worksheet is good. All of our tubes are properly labeled. We can begin testing. Let's make a 2 to 5% red cell suspension. Take a clean transfer pipette, uncap your sample, and put 2 drops of red cells in a clean labeled tube and dispose of your pipette. Now, fill this tube 3/4 of the way full with saline. Take a clean transfer pipette and thoroughly mix. Repeat this process for your next sample. Again, 2 drops of red blood cells in a clean labeled tube. Take that tube and fill it 3/4 of the way with saline. And thoroughly mix. Now, we're going to take both of these samples and put them in the centrifuge across from one another, making sure that the centrifuge is balanced. Now, run it on the wash setting, which is 60 seconds. And wait. The centrifuge is done, so now it's time to decant and resuspend. So let's start with the first tube. See See the cell button packed at the bottom. We're just going to invert the tube and dump out the saline, and we are not going to blot the tube. Good. And now to resuspend with a small amount of saline. Use the transfer pipette to resuspend. Make sure you get the cell button completely resuspended. And now compare to the color of our reagent red blood cells. We have a similar cherry red color, so we know that the red cell suspension has been made correctly. And we will repeat this process for the next sample. Same thing, decant manually by inverting the tube, do not blot. Resuspend by adding a small amount of saline. Resuspend with the transfer pipette. And compare colors. Both have that cherry red color, so I know that my suspensions have been made correctly. Now, before we begin to drop our reagents, let's take a look at what we're going to be using. Anti-A reacts with red cells that have the A antigen. Anti-B reacts with red cells that have the B antigen. Anti-AB reacts with red cells that have the A antigen or the B antigen. Anti-D reacts with red cells that have the D antigen. RH control is used to verify the D typing. A1 cells, reagent red blood cells that react with plasma if it contains anti-A. B cells. These are reagent red blood cells that react with patient plasma if it contains anti-B. Lys is used to enhance reactions. Anti-IgG is used to form crosslinks between red blood cells that are sensitized with IgG. Check cells. These are used to verify negative reactions and to make sure that anti-IgG was added during the AHG phase of testing. Now it's time to drop our reagents. We're going to start with 1 drop of anti-A for each patient. One drop of anti-B for each patient. 1 drop of anti-AB for each patient. One drop of anti-D for each patient. One drop of RH control for each patient. To all of the tubes to which we just added our reagent, we're going to put 1 drop of that 2 to 5% red cell suspension. For the reverse grouping, we're going to be dropping 2 drops of patient plasma and 1 drop of reagent red blood cells. Two drops of plasma in each tube. One drop of the appropriate reagent red blood cell suspension. The first tube will get 1 drop of A1 cells. The second tube will get 1 drop of B cells. And it's time to put Adelphi fills tubes into the centrifuge. So I'm going to put them in the centrifuge in the order that I want to read them. So let's start with the anti-A tube, anti-B tube, anti-AB tube, anti-D tube. So 1, 2, 3, 4. Now D control tube, A cell tube, B cell tube, and I'm going to use a balance tube for the final spot to make sure that the centrifuge is balanced. We have 4 tubes on each side, and each tube has a tube opposite from it. The centrifuge is balanced, and we're going to run that for 15 seconds. Now it's time to read our reactions for our first patient, Philadelphia. Let's start with the anti-A tube. See the red cell button at the bottom of the tube. Let's hold it up to this agglutination viewer and gently shake the tube to resuspend. I see 1 solid red cell clump. That's a 4+ reaction. So these red blood cells have the A antigen on them because they react with anti-A. And we're going to annotate that on our sheet for Philadelphia. Forward type, anti-A, 4+. How about anti-B? Let's take a look. I see no clumps. This is a negative reaction. These red blood cells do not have the B antigen on them. They will not react with anti-B. So, anti-B, negative reaction. How about anti-AB? Quite similar to the anti-A tube. One solid clump. That's a 4+ reaction. Because these red cells have the A antigen on them, they react with anti-AB. So, I will interpret this as type A. Now for the anti-D tube for Philadelphia. I see one solid clump. This is a 4+ reaction. These red blood cells have the D antigen. So, let's record that under D typing. Anti-D, immediate spin, 4+ reaction. Now for the D control. I see no clumps. This is a negative reaction. And this verifies the anti-D tube. So, RH control, immediate spin, negative. Moving on to the reverse group. Patient plasma with A cells. I see no clumps. This is a negative reaction. This plasma does not contain anti-A. This is a negative reaction. What about the B cells? I see one large clump surrounded by smaller clumps. This is a 3+ reaction. This plasma contains anti-B. Overall, ABO and RH interpretation for Philadelphia. His red blood cells react with anti-A and anti-AB. They do not react with anti-B. That means that his red blood cells have the A antigen. He is type A. His plasma does not react with A1 cells. It reacts with B cells. This is consistent with type A. For D typing, his red blood cells react with anti-D at immediate spin. And this reaction was verified using the RH control. A negative reaction verifies the anti-D reaction. He is RH positive. Overall, Phil Adelphi is A positive. Now that we are done with Phil Adelphi, it's time to spin Alissa Angelfish's tubes. Here we go, just like last time. Anti-A, anti-B, anti-AB, anti-D, RH control, A cells, and B cells. And remember, I have my balance tube to make everything even and balanced. And we centrifuge for 15 seconds. Now let's start by reading the anti-A tube for Alissa Angelfish. I see no clumps. This is a negative reaction. These red blood cells do not have the A antigen. How about the anti-B tube for Alissa Angelfish? I see no clumps. This is a negative reaction. These red blood cells do not have the B antigen. Now for anti-AB. I see no clumps. This is a negative reaction. These red blood cells do not have the A antigen or the B antigen. We interpret this as type O. Now for the anti-D tube for Alissa Angelfish. I see no clumps. This is a negative reaction. These red blood cells do not have the D antigen. And we're going to verify this with the control tube. I see no clumps. This is a negative reaction. This validates the reactivity of the anti-D tube. Now for the A cell tube for Alissa Angelfish. I see one large clump. This is a 4+ reaction. This plasma contains anti-A. What about the B cell tube? I see one large clump surrounded by smaller clumps. This is a 3+ reaction. This plasma contains anti-B. This is consistent with type O. The anti-D tube and the RH control tube for Alissa Angelfish are both negative at immediate spin, so I will demonstrate how to perform weak D testing. I will begin by taking the D tube and the RH control tube for Alissa Angelfish, and I will incubate them in a heat block at 37 degrees Celsius for 15 minutes. My tubes are done incubating for 15 minutes, so I'm going to take them and spin them again for 15 seconds. I'll remove the balance tube because that's no longer needed. Now it's time to read and record the reactivity for the anti-D tube and the D control tube at the 37 degrees Celsius incubation phase. So, starting with the anti-D tube for Alissa Angelfish. No clumps. Negative reaction. D control tube. No clumps. Another negative reaction. Now, moving on to the AHG phase of weak D testing. We're going to fill our anti-D tube 3/4 of the way with saline. Place that in the centrifuge and do the same thing for the D control tube. And centrifuge on the wash setting, which is 60 seconds. The first wash of my week D is complete, so now I am going to manually decant and add more saline. Repeat that process. As I squirt saline directly into the bottom, the red cell button is resuspended. Now for the second wash. The second wash of week D is complete. Now it's time to repeat that process, manually decant and resuspend. Manually decant and resuspend. The final wash of our week D test is complete. Now it's time to invert the tube and gently blot with a Kim wipe this time. Next tube. And now we'll get ready to add our anti-IgG. Now that our third wash is complete, it's time to add 2 drops of anti-IgG to the anti-D tube and the D control tube. Mix thoroughly. Place them in the centrifuge, balanced of course. And centrifuge at the AHG setting, which as you can see here is 20 seconds. Now it's time to read and record at the AHG phase, starting with the anti-D tube for Alissa Angelfish. I see no clumps. That's a negative reaction. And I will record that in the week D IgG area. Now for the D control tube. I see no clumps. Another negative reaction. And now we will verify these negative reactions by adding 1 drop of check cells and centrifuging one more time. 20 seconds. Finally, we are going to read and record our check cells. One solid clump in the anti-D tube. That is a 4+ reaction for the check cells. And the D control tube. One solid clump with some smaller clumps surrounding it. That's a 3+ reaction for the check cells. So now I can confidently say that Alissa Angelfish is Rh negative. And now I can finally do my overall interpretation for Alissa Angelfish. She is O negative. Thank you for watching.